Hi, I'm Len Day, CEO and founder of State of Flux, and welcome to the Power of Three, a video series where we interview leading chief procurement officers and executives about three things that have influenced their careers. From books to bosses, from music to movies, we explore the three things that have shaped their success. Join us as we learn from the best of the business here on the Power of Three. Hi everybody, and welcome to the Power of Three. Today I'm very privileged to have Len DeCandia joining us, and I've been lucky enough to meet Len on a number of occasions, and really excited to hear about his career and influences throughout that. So thank you, Len, for joining us. And I'm going to just start in kind of typical kind of Power of Three to get you to do a bit of an introduction to yourself and cover three roles that you've had and three things that you'd like to be known for. That's okay.
All right. Well, we're mutually fortunate to know each other, Alan. So thank you for the time and a chance to allow me to share. I think we were just discussing the fact that I did start my career as an engineer, and probably the first big role that I had was, and it was fairly early in my career, maybe about 10 years into my career, for Johnson & Johnson. But one of the products that Johnson & Johnson is known for is Band-Aid brand. In some parts of the world, they call them plasters, but we all know what they are. And they were in need of being modernized and bringing a whole new way of delivering that product to consumers around the world. So I had the good fortune of running the program that actually built brand new custom, patented equipment, and happy to tell you, 30 years later, we're here 30 years later, and it's still the way they make Band-Aids or plasters for around the world. They have it in a factory in South America, and you need special clearance to go see those pieces of equipment. So it's something that was a fun accomplishment for me. Probably the second was when I had an opportunity. And I left J&J for a number of years. And my first big position after I left was to be the first person to have the title Vice President of Supply Chain Management for Roche, the Swiss pharmaceutical company. And that was a challenging and exciting time. It was in the era where we were really trying to understand how we could better manage AIDS and HIV virus. And we were fortunate to be able to make some of those products that were fairly revolutionary to make AIDS be not a life sentence, but a chronic disease that one can have a fulfilling and a full life. And that was really my first experience around, I think for me, the ability to make a small difference in the world and really change people's lives. And so that was, for me, an exciting assignment. It was a pressure-filled assignment because it was in such an amazing time. We literally, when we were making some of these products, we literally had patients who would chain themselves to the front gate of the facility because they wanted access to the drugs, but we had to follow all of the regulatory processes to be able to do that. And so you're driving in the morning and you see people who are really counting on your team to really help save their lives. And so that was a real, I would say for me, an enlightening and an inspiring experience around, picking a purpose in your life and something that you can make a small difference. And probably I would say, for me, the last assignment that I had after going back to Johnson & Johnson and really, after 130 years of decentralization, and the company going from maybe 5 billion in revenue when I first joined there 40 years ago to close to 100 billion in revenue, and working with every one of our affiliates around the world and really consolidating and looking at our supplier base, and really putting in practices and systems, technologies that could allow our internal business partners to operate at a much more efficient pace, right? And to be able to work with the key vendors on a real-time basis and not have to worry about bureaucracy getting in the way, and really accelerating our ability to deliver value. And obviously, working as the Chief Procurement Officer through the global pandemic, and making sure that we were getting life-saving drugs out to the 65 plus countries that we serve around the world, and really developing the first ever vaccine that the company ever made. It made a difference globally in some parts of the world, but to start from zero against companies who have been making vaccines for a number of years and being able to close that gap so quickly, and seeing people come together during a time of great stress and of great heartache, really, with the pandemic, and again having an opportunity to collaborate not only internally, but amazing amount of collaboration that was happening externally with our suppliers and externally with other pharmaceutical companies around our ability to be able to help. And so I've been very fortunate, Alan, to have assignments like those where it was relevant, it made a difference, and most importantly, to work with incredibly talented people who lead with their heart, but had the intellectual capability of doing things that had never been done before.
Thanks, Len. And one of the things that's always stood out for me when dealing with yourself and your teams is that kind of collaboration, partnership approach, and I know it comes out in a number of articles written about you and what you've done. But just I'm curious around kind of if you stand back now. Towards the end of your career, what are the kind of the three things that really, when you look back, you want to be remembered for and want people to know?
I think most of my assignments were transformational assignments. Introducing technology and introducing effectiveness, speed, and efficiency into organizations. I go back to that. Talked about the manufacturing technology that we use in making the plasters and the Band-Aids, and it was introducing independent electronic drives in the 90s, in the early 90s, similar to what drives a Tesla or an electric vehicle today. So introducing that type of technology, and then with that Roche assignment, one of my big responsibilities was to introduce an ERP system, and then most recently, so using technology and really introducing new ways of working that allow organizations to be much more efficient and effective. And one of the dimensions of delivering on all of those programs was, I think, a little bit of my persistency, right? So I would say I would probably like to be known as being persistent. And I think you need that in your life and in your career. You need a little bit of belief in yourself. You need a lot of optimism that you're going to get from one side of the river to the other, and that you're building the bridge while you're doing that. And then at the end of the day, you really want to make sure you live up to your promises. And if you look at transformational programs over the past 30 or 40 years of my career, and even most recently with cloud technology and SaaS systems now, less than 50% of transformation programs actually deliver against their promise. And I think that it has a lot more to do with people and collaboration than to do with technology. Technology is always ahead of us as human beings. And I think as leaders, I think it becomes our responsibility to really help to get organizations and people at an individual level, because change is different for every human being. But at an individual level, to really understand what their work could be, but more importantly, what their contribution could be, and to help them make their own personal journey through change. And I think for me as a leader, the ability to lead amazing teams across that type of change, and to be able to allow people to not only survive change, but to thrive in change, I hope is something that I could be somewhat remembered for. And to do it in a way that was purposeful, and understanding it's bigger than the company that you're working for, that it has a positive impact on the world and the society and the communities that we're part of. If you were to sit here and ask me about my most recent assignment at Johnson & Johnson, we saw things in our procurement group where we increased our annual savings by 50%. We optimize the supplier base by close to 100%. But I think the one piece that I'm most proud of is that we doubled our community impact spend. And we went from doing that type of social impact procurement just in the United States to over 17 countries around the world. So we brought some of those practices and allowed, Johnson and Johnson to be a leader in being able to be a productive contributor to the many communities that they do business in. Because the reality is, those communities are where their customers are. It's where their employees are as well. And more than anything else, right, you really want to make sure that you're delivering on your promise to your customers and to your employees.
I agree. Thank you for that. And so I'm going to change it up a little bit, if I may, and get into a few things that sort of have influenced you throughout your career. And what I might start with, if this is all right, is just 3 books that you've read and have left a kind of lasting impression.
Yeah, I think first I'll tell you about my favorite book of all time, and that's The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. It's one of those books that I've read at least 10 times. It's one of those go-to books that you want to go and read, and it's an incredible story, right? And look, I'm a son of immigrants, and so my parents came to the States from Italy right after World War II. Both of them were severely impacted by the war. They were children during the war. My mother was a refugee, so she lost her home and her village was destroyed, and her family, and she and her sisters barely made it out of their village. And my father lost his father, who was an infantryman for the Italian army in North Africa. So, it's the typical, F. Scott Fitzgerald's story is the typical American dream story, right? And you try to get an understanding of who this character Gatsby is, because he's quite a mystery through all of this. And it really looks to issues that still impact our society today, around wealth distribution and how it is not as fair as it should be. And I don't think it's just a story here in the States. I think it's a story in many other parts of the world.
I agree.
And it talks about, once you finally get to learn about this character Gatsby, it talks about integrity and honesty. And what you find is that he achieved his wealth in a very strange way and a not very honest way, and he gets his due at the end, right? And so the character development in it and the way it's written. I live in Princeton, New Jersey, here in the States, and F. Scott Fitzgerald is a graduate of Princeton University, and so I get a chance every once in a while when I'm in town to walk past the house that he stayed in as a student. It's one of those famous historical places that people point to. But I love that book, and I love the story, and I know there's been a couple of movies made. I still like the original with Robert Redford, but I thought the DiCaprio one was pretty good as well. So that's one. One of the other books that I really have started to spend a lot of time with, and that's thanks to my wife, especially since I've retired, is the Bible. I really, I grew up as a Roman Catholic. My wife is Christian, but I didn't know much about the Old Testament. I knew pretty much a lot about the New Testament. So we've been doing some Bible study around the Old Testament. And it's amazing how people haven't changed in thousands of years. So you can learn about good leaders and not so good leaders, right? And so the Bible is just been a wonderful experience for me through some of the readings, and it's helped me in my relationship with my wife. Better understand our life together. My wife and I have been together since we were freshmen at university. So we've been together 45 years now. So we met each other at a very early age. And you think you would know everything about someone, right? When you've been together with them for so long. But, sitting there, when we do our small group Bible study, then we talk about just the two of us during our readings. And so it's just a wonderful way to learn about mankind, and something that obviously is relevant and will always be relevant. When you start to get to third books, that's when things get a little tougher. I, re,
I'm not going
I
to let
love,
you off.
yeah, I love biographies.
Yeah,
I've
me
always
too.
told, I always told my children, I've always said, I love biographies because I can live 1,000 lifetimes in one lifetime. And just, we learn so much by our failures and so much from our experiences that biographies are just a great way of doing it. Um, so if I were to tell you out of the multitudes of biographies who I probably really have enjoyed learning about, and I've read multiple books, and that would be Teddy Roosevelt, who was a
Okay.
president here in the States at the turn of the last century, the 1900s. Just a fascinating individual who grew up with wealth, but was completely committed to a lot of the causes that we're committed to today
Mm,
in today's
mm,
world. Right? He started the system of government national parks in the United States because of his care for the ecology and for just the ability to keep nature available. And he started his father was really and he really delivered a significant amount to the Museum of Natural History in Manhattan. Um, but as a leader, very much someone who led from the front, very much someone who wanted to experience what everyone else experienced, and he was really someone who spoke to and spoke for the working class people. It was coming out of the industrial age. There was incredible wealth in the United States held by very few people, and he really took on his social class. At his own risk to really to try to make a difference. And I think it's some of the issues we're dealing with today globally that we really need to continue to embrace. So I would say any Teddy Roosevelt biography is a book that I would pick up at any time.
excellent. Yeah, I'm a big biography fan, so we can
Yeah,
swap some after this.
you
But
know it.
thank you for that. And you've mentioned Great Gatsby, which kind of gives me memories back to my own sixth form and studying the Great Gatsby. And of course the movies. So my next question is around movies, and what are the kind of three movies that you've either been influenced by or just frankly really enjoyed and would recommend?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Well, a great favorite for our family that we've seen a number of times is the movie Moonstruck. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie with Cher. And we just see too many parallels between that family and my family, so it's become something that we really enjoy watching as a family. And I can remember, and it's I don't know if you can. I can remember going to a movie theater for the first time, and I think I was 4 years old, if I have my math right. And I went with my parents. And movie theaters in the States today are very different than what they were 60 years ago. 60 years ago, there were beautiful palaces with big grand stairways, and curtains that would open and the movie would start, and just an incredible experience. Now we live in an era of, well, I don't even know how long movie theaters are going to be around with all the streaming services that are around, but now we have all these multiplexes and it's very different. But the first movie I went to see was the James Bond movie Goldfinger. And
Excellent.
it just instantly made me a James Bond fan. And so whenever the new movies come out, I'm always, I'm going to go and see those movies first in line. And all of the different actors who've had the opportunity to play that role have just been fantastic. And so and if you look at the character itself. It's again, it's for some reason I'm always intrigued by like Gatsby or Bond. I'm always intrigued by these characters that have multiple dimensions. You think you know
Yeah.
them, but you really don't know them, right? But deep down inside, there's a good, but they also have this, and some have, they have this deep down inside good, and they have one incredible skill that they over leverage in any situation, right? And so, those types of movies fascinate me because I love character study type
Yeah.
movies. I don't know if you've seen, they just did the Academy Awards here in the States. And the movie that I love that was up for an Academy Award was the movie Tar with Cate Blanchett, who's an incredible actress.
Oh,
She's
yes.
the Meryl Streep of her time. She is just an amazing actress. And it's again one of those character studies where you just get an opportunity to learn about the character through their experiences and how they manage the challenges that they have in their lives. So I really enjoy those types of movies where you get to learn about a particular character and how they navigate their way through this wonderful game we call life.
Excellent, thank you. Now, just going back to work, because the movie and there's definitely parallels between your movies and books in terms of the study of people, biographies, and so on. I'm trying to think of the kind of and probably the debonair gentleman as well there, Len. But anyway,
I should have worn a tux for this interview.
You should have.
I
you really
should have. Yeah. Let me go get a martini. I can take care of that pretty quickly.
Well, and perhaps it might have come from my next question, which was 3 bosses that have influenced you. So I'm wondering whether there were debonair gents in the past that perhaps were in their tux that influenced you, or was it something different?
Yeah, I think probably for me, if I were to look at the 3 bosses that influenced me, one characteristic would be very focused, really understanding the mission of the business or the mission of the organization. That was always an important characteristic for me. Was that I've had opportunities to have bosses or supervisors that I align with, and ones that were difficult for me to understand and challenge. And it was the ones that sometimes had a difficult time making up their mind around priorities and were more reactive than proactive towards where things were going. So I think for me, those bosses or supervisors who had clarity of purpose and were able to really allow the organization to operate in an environment that allowed them to be successful because they were operating with a clarity of purpose. I think the second piece would be really those that understood the business and the nature of what the organization was trying to accomplish. And probably for me, the third would be allowed freedom to operate. I've always had difficult times with managers,
Yes.
and much better times. And I always wanted to make sure when I had responsibilities in leading individuals and teams, that I allowed teams the ability to operate, but gave them at least a framework to operate within, and a recognition of progress, right? Because I think you can't measure progress with a final outcome. You have to really kind of measure progress in small steps, and sometimes there's a lot of learning even when you take a step back. And I think those types of supervisors were supervisors that I really enjoyed working for. And I never felt I worked for them. I always felt I worked with them.
Yes.
And because that kind of created that type of collaborative environment that allows people to really bring their best, and not only with supervisors and teams, but it's also externally when you're working with various suppliers or customers. You can really tell when you're creating an environment of a common goal and mutual success, where you can maintain a level of high integrity, where you can be honest. You can be honest about what's working, what's not working, and there isn't a feeling of a hidden agenda or an agenda that's misaligned with what people are trying to do together. And unfortunately, I would say I had fewer good bosses than fewer bad bosses.
And so early in your career, because we know that you started as an engineer, and we've had a bit of a discussion prior to this about engineers
Right.
As I said, I'm a son of an engineer, so I'm
God bless
wondering about, perhaps similar to your James Bond
you.
piece. Maybe I see engineers in the same light, but um, uh,
Was your father
uh,
one of those people that like wouldn't hire anybody to fix something that was broken? He would try like to jury rig it or figure it out on his own.
well, well, this is the great thing, Lynn, is that when I was one, my grandfather, my mother's father, had purchased a farm. He was an investor or a finance chap, and so when I was one, Mum and Dad decided to throw in their careers and move
Huh.
to this farm. So not only did he get to tinker with everything there, he was able to get these massive sheds on the farm that he could
Yeah.
collect all his tools and try all these different things. So yes, there's definitely a legacy still there of these
Wonderful.
sheds. But yeah, so I was just wondering if there was bosses early in your career that kind of steered you, because you made the transition from engineering to
Yeah.
procurement supply chain. So was there kind of individuals throughout your career that kind of helped nudge you in certain directions
Yeah.
and things like that?
Well, I think I was kind of shoved as opposed to nudged. So, I mentioned I did that project for the Band-Aid plasters, and so I had engineering responsibilities and I had manufacturing responsibilities, and so I was in my early 30s. I took over that project when I was 29 years old. It was probably one of the biggest projects in the company at the time, and the individual who had this role previous to me did not do a very good job. It ended up being asked to leave the company. So I walked into one of those scenarios where it was, it was the French swimming instructor one, if you throw you into the pool and if you make it to the end, that's great. But if you drown, that's fine with you. And so, as I had mentioned, the team did very well. And to this day, they did well. So I thought, this is great. I don't know what the next opportunity was going to be for me. But I was ready to go. They had a big dinner for our team, and a lot of the J&J executives came to the dinner. I can remember my wife leaning over to me. True story, Alan, leaning over to me. I'm like 32 years old now, right? And I've got the company executives there, and she said, it's not going to get any better for you than this right now, because I just felt like there was nothing else you could conquer at this stage. So I was waiting for my next assignment. And so the senior vice president called me in downtown into his office to talk to me about my next assignment. And so I went to see him, and I was ready for, who knows, but I was ready to conquer the world. And he said, Len, he goes, things are changing. The computer is becoming more a part of the work that we do, which is true. And obviously, he said you just experienced it with all that great work that you did with the team. And he goes, and one of the things that's happening as well is we really can't afford to build these massive plants anymore and manufacture all of our own equipment. And we just, technology is happening too fast, and we just don't have the capital to do that. And so we're gonna start to pivot towards doing more work externally, and using suppliers. So we want you to be the head of this new area that we're calling supply management. So I said, what? That's purchasing. There's no way I'm going into that. I can't do engineering there. I just ran the biggest plant in the company. Are you kidding me? And so I was a little, it wasn't as emotional as I'm showing now. I covered it up pretty well, but I was a little concerned, to say the least, around where we were going. But he was a real visionary. He recognized that that being able to do more work, to manage innovation, and to be more collaborative on the supplier side, because the company was learning all of those experiences on the customer side as well. And so I think he was a visionary. He saw a talent in me, because he sold me on that role, and he wanted me in that role because he saw a talent in me. He thought that I had the ability to collaborate, and I had the ability to lift the performance of teams, let them believe in themselves. And he felt that it was a great opportunity for me to work with companies outside of our own, to bring new ideas to market and to be able to execute. And he was absolutely right. He was such a visionary in being able to do that. And so my career went from operations, manufacturing, engineering to supply management, and now it's a science. Now we talk about supply chain, and I just one of the things that I'm very proud of having at least a hand in is I went to a public university here in New Jersey, the largest one, a university called Rutgers, and about 23 years ago helped to start the supply chain program there. And it's done really, really well. I think Gartner has it as the fifth best program in the country. But it's really created an incredible career for so many young people. It's the second largest major there, and now you see and the world is seeing the importance of supply chain management. When you look at the pandemic, and then you understand how the world works. I'm reading a book right now. It's called How the World Was Won. It was written by a Cambridge professor named Phillips O'Brien. And the reality is, when you look at an event like the World War, you recognize that there really wasn't, we talk about D-Day and we talk about the various battles, but there really wasn't a singular battle that really determined the outcome of that war. What determined the outcome of that war was supply chain. It was air and sea superiority. So the British and the Americans could build planes faster than the Germans could build planes. And therefore, they were able to put more equipment out there, give pilots more of an opportunity to train better, and the equipment went out in better quality. And it was purely a game of supply chain. It was purely a game of being able to supply and support. And I bet you if you go back and you look at the history of all of this in terms of supply, what we call supply chain and logistics, logistics is really what's associated with any type of growth and innovation, right? Societies have grown and flourished by their ability to be able to provide resources so that people, could live and thrive in various communities. And I think we're at one of those points right now, Alan. I look at this pandemic in the same light as the world wars that we saw in the previous century.
I agree.
This was a war against the virus that everybody in the world fought. So this was a world war. There's no doubt in my mind.
Everyone had the same purpose, which is
that's right. With everyone
quite unusual, really.
Right, really, very unusual. And being on the front lines of that, recognizing, literally, having suppliers in operations, suppliers in over 65, 70 countries around the world, I not only had to worry about the employees in our operation, but I had to worry about my suppliers' employees as well. And I had to worry about the countries they were in. And it was the first time really in 25 years as either being a CSO or a CPO where we worked very closely with the government affairs group in terms of being able to keep facilities open to make life-saving drugs, making sure that there was PPE, that their practices were keeping people healthy and safe, where they were, and I'm talking about, you name the country, and everyone had different policies around the world associated with all of that. So, you go through an experience like that, you see how complex the world is, but how unique it is in the fact that when everyone has, a common purpose, like we were talking about here, fighting that virus, you can make extraordinary things happen. But what happens most importantly when you have something like that is that the adoption of technology is accelerated incredibly fast, right? So we've seen, greater use of technology, virtual technology, whether it's in education and business and whatever else. And we've also seen, the ability to deploy technology in our business. We had to learn how to use virtual reality to train surgeons who could no longer come to our facilities to learn about our new equipment, right? But this allowed us to be able to not only use technology to train those surgeons, but it accelerated the learning for those surgeons, which then created greater access for patients to the tools that they were being provided. So you have that. Then you have societal change that
Yes.
comes along with all of this. And I think that's what we're in the middle of right now. I've been arguing with economists for about ever since the pandemic started because I didn't see inflation as a transitory experience. What I was experiencing in my role was a significant change. And I saw a change probably in two areas. One was, and I did a paper about this earlier this year. I felt over the past, let's say, 15 years coming out of the financial crisis, when everyone had pretty easy access to capital, right? Because there was this zero, that a significant amount of investment was made, but a lot of that investment was made at the customer side, which is great. We created new channels, right? We've created, if we didn't have the Amazons or the DoorDashes, we never would have made it through a lot of these pandemics, right? But I think we might have commoditized our relationships with our employees, and in some cases, even our relationships with suppliers, right? But if you focus on employees and you focus on the world and you focus on inflation, the reality is if you look at demographics around the world, we are absolutely moving into an era where supply of labor is going down, right? So if you look at the States, what you'll see is people like me, I'm a baby boomer, are reaching retirement age. And if you look at the past 20 years, the number of children being born in the United States is down, right? And so our labor base is starting to decline. So now it's an issue of supply. If you put your global lens on, if you look at China, if you go back to 1970, 80% of the population of China was under the age of 50. Today, 50% of the population of China is over the age of 50, right? And so I think what's driving inflation and driving a lot of our challenges now is the fact that we are in a bit of a labor shortage, and that demand is going to outrun supply. And it goes back to the conversation, the part of the conversation we had about 15 or 20 minutes ago. If transformational programs haven't been successful, if investment has been made on the customer side but not in the productivity area, the only way to achieve, your ability to meet demand is by improving productivity. And sooner or later, companies are going to have to stop raising prices because sooner or later people just can't afford to buy what they're asking for, or someone's going to crack the code on productivity and they're going to go after and capture share by lowering prices, and you're not going to be able to compete with them anymore. And so I think for current and maybe future supply chain leaders, I think they really need to think about how you're going to be successful operating in a world of scarcity versus the world of abundance that I was fortunate enough to be a leader in. And then in a world of scarcity, you really need to understand what's happening at the point of use at your customer level, but you also are really going to need to understand the health of your employee base and the health of your supplier base.
I completely agree. I'm going to pause you there.
Sure.
Because I 100% agree. And funnily enough, our book this year, as you know, we do the book each year, and the focus of our book this year is around the extended enterprise, because we think the focus of this Chief Procurement Officer can no longer be procurement. It has to be managing the extended enterprise. But I will pause you because I'm curious to get your to get three sort of quotes that might have influenced or that you live by throughout the career, because I know you're a lifelong learner, so I'm really interested in seeing what's kind of motivated you throughout that time, and I'd love to get those three quotes from you.
Yeah, I have maybe one quote, but there's a couple of little poems that I like. And I'll go back to my hero, Teddy Roosevelt. And he wrote a wonderful little poem called The Man in the Arena. And it really talks about, don't criticize the person in the arena, because they're the ones that are doing the work, and they're the one that are out there, and really, your role is to be that person, to be your best self. And then the other one is called the man in the mirror, and that one really speaks to the fact that at the end of the day, the standards you need to live to is the person that you see in the mirror, and that always try to live up to those ideals, right? To those standards, and I think the concept that you brought up around lifelong learning is really an important part of anyone's experience. I think the one that I like is a Picasso one. This one was one that really caught me over the past, let's say, 10 years. And he basically said something to the effect of, your mission in life is to find the gift that God gave you. And your purpose in life is to share that gift. And I think more than anything else, especially at this stage of my career, it's so important. I actually, about an hour or two ago, I just finished up a project working with the faculty at the business school that I mentioned at the Rutgers Business School. And I've been working with them around this whole concept about this is transformational time, and how should the curriculum for a business school change as it relates to this time. And I think dimensions that become important for the young people out there is the value of what you're investing in, and obviously there's a financial investment. There's also an intellectual and a personal investment, right? A time investment in that. And then from the responsibility of an academic institute, it's really how relevant and how important the content is for the student. And the only way that content is meaningful is if it's delivered in a way that the student can really understand the concepts that they're learning, and then how do I put those concepts to practice. And as an example, a couple of the areas that we really need to think about with current and future leaders in supply is, what role is AI technology going to play? And I use the crazy analogy, Alan. My freshman year in engineering school was the first year they allowed calculators. Okay, so I don't want to date myself, but I did get trained in how to use a slide rule. Now, I don't know if there's anyone. I'm sure your dad probably knows how to use a slide rule, right?
Yes, he does.
But think about it, right? Think about what I experienced in my lifetime, in my career, right? From being a student to be the first to use a calculator, right? To what we're talking about today, right?
It's amazing, isn't it?
It's incredible.
And we can already see that, the RFP is dead because all the responses will be based on Chat GDP.
Yeah.
So, why even send out an RFP anymore when they're all going to be cookie cutter responses? But anyway, we digress. I'm going to ask you a non-work question.
Sure.
Which is about how you relax, and probably more importantly, to get you to kind of think about 3 music tracks that that have influenced you, or frankly just you love.
Yeah. So how I relax, and you had mentioned it earlier. I read a lot. I mentioned the book that I'm reading now. It's about 500 pages. It's that thick. All the data you ever wanted to know on World War II production efficiencies. I don't know if that means anything to anyone, but I love to read. And my wife and I go to, so I live in Princeton, New Jersey, where the university is. And so my wife and I go to adult education lectures. And so I'm heading to one later this evening. And again, it's just fantastic. These professors are so accomplished, there, and that they would invest their free time to tell somebody like me a story, or their story is just an amazing an amazing thing. So I love to read, and I love to speak to people who are just so passionate about their topic and their subject and what they do. Um, when it comes to music, now I was a teenager in the 70s, and 70s was the album era, right? See, because again, another one of those, just like calculators and slide rules, another one of those obsolete things. Although I still see some people with vinyl records out there, right?
My teenager
Huh?
is boredom. His birthday present was a record player.
There you go. You see
There
that?
you go. Yeah.
And so maybe I'll and I love music. You know, I always have satellite radio playing in the background. But I would say three albums that I just ran into the ground. One was the Who's Next album by the Who, which I thought, for me, the Who were just like the epitome of 70s rock and roll. You know, I really love that album. Um, The Stranger by Billy Joel. So Billy Joel is for my wife and I one of our favorites. So we've seen him quite a number of times. He performs in New York quite often now. I think he has he's done almost 100 different concerts at Madison Square Garden. So we've been to quite a few of those. So The Stranger, and then I think if you were to say songs, so a song that I loved growing up with as a teenager, and I don't even know if you know this song, but it was a song called "Miracles" by Jefferson Starship. All right, and so they were big. Hotel California by the Eagles.
Yes.
Great song. I love guitar. And then when I was finishing up university, it was the era of punk rock, you know, when they blew up all the disco albums, and you know, you had all those, and a song and a video that is my favorite of all times. It was by a British rocker named Nick Lowe, and the name of the song was "Cruel to Be Kind." So my wife hated the song. I love this song. Now, the influence to me on those songs, I think music has to capture your heart. I mean, if you can,
I agree.
if you can, and look, music for us is the poetry of our time. You know, I live in New Jersey, and one of our more famous people, and I'm going to, I don't know, maybe the 12th or 15th concert is Bruce Springsteen. So he only lives a few miles away. As a matter of fact, I was at my daughter was in high school about 15 years ago, 12 or 15 years ago. She's a professor now down at Georgetown. But I went to my daughter's sporting event, and she was playing American softball, you know, baseball. And I was standing in the outfield watching her team play. And it was one of those open areas with common fields. And behind me, there was a young girls lacrosse game going on, a high school lacrosse game. And then there were some parents there, and I looked to my right at a parent that was very, very familiar watching his daughter play lacrosse. And it was Bruce Springsteen standing about 10 feet away from me, you know, watching his daughter play lacrosse against my daughter's high school while I was watching my daughter's high school play softball. And needless to say, I let Bruce be a dad that day. I left him alone, just like he didn't even come up to me and ask me, you know, for an autograph or a photo or anything like that, Alan. But but music is really the poetry of our time, whether it's rap music or hip hop or anything you hear now. And it's really a great source of inspiration and opportunities for all of us to either relive our experiences or reminisce about those experiences, or share those deep down feelings that sometimes it's difficult for us to express.
I have to say, as a question that I've been asking, this is one that just gives such great answers. You know, I mentioned that a number of the other people I've interviewed have been, well, for some reason, the first few have all been started their career as engineers. But we've had a real range from Eminem all the way through to opera. It's been incredibly insightful, actually. So I'm definitely loving this question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a peek into all of our souls, isn't it?
It certainly is. So on that note, I'm gonna, so I kind of mentioned, and one of the influences of doing this power of three piece was really the technique that we've been using in State of Flux around three things that have gone well and three things that could be improved. So I'm going to throw that to you. And when you stand back and look at your career, what are the three things that you think you've done well, and the three things that you could improve during that time? Then?
Sure. I think one was I always felt it was good to surround myself with people that were a lot smarter than I am. So, I'm very curious, but I'm also a little lazy. So it's always great to have really talented people to work with. And so I think I've been very fortunate to have just been able to work with so many talented people. Two, I think the ability to understand where we needed to go, and so it allowed me the ability to maybe see things that others couldn't see sometimes, and bring that focus that teams need, because the world is complex and you can be easily distracted, and so keeping a focus really allows an environment for people to understand how they can spend their time, and how they should be able to spend their time. And I think the other piece is, I moved around. I took on 4 really big C-level assignments in my career, because I don't know if I was getting bored, but I always looked for the next big challenge. I always liked. I never felt I was going to do anything by the book. I always wanted to write the book on what I was doing.
Love that.
I think so. So that those are what could I have done better? I think sometimes I can be impatient. So there were times when I should have been more patient, and allow things to evolve, as opposed to pushing the issue. And I think that impatience was not always was necessary in some cases, but in some cases it didn't allow people to really learn, because you kind of push things to a conclusion without allowing individuals or teams to learn about it along the way. I think another area that I probably could have done better as a leader, I think is for me, sometimes I have a very high results orientation, and so sometimes you need to make sure that when you bring people through the process, you can't get too far out ahead of them in terms of trying to achieve a result. And I think I learned to be better at that as my career advanced, because I recognized that I think initially I was trying to put points on the board, because I thought that's what my job was, to just put points on the board.
Yes.
But then I learned as I evolved in my career that if you're going to be effective, you need to put a sustainable approach in it. And the only way it's sustainable is if everyone who's involved really understands the journey that they're on, their role in that journey, and then how they could take it to the next level. So I think it's something that as my career progressed and I had more and more experience, I learned how to do much better through the years. But it was a lot of that early learning in that case. And then the third thing is, I wish I were better at personal finances. I didn't invest in Apple when I should have, in Microsoft when I should have, and you sit here today, and you're like 30 years later, and you said, boy, I was there when everybody thought Microsoft wasn't going to make it, or Apple, and so I think. But all kidding aside, I think one thing that's very important for people as they manage their time in their career, and one thing I thought I did pretty good, and it was the most important thing, is that I always put my family first. And no matter how big your job is or how big the headache is, always put your family first.
That's awesome, and that's a perfect segue into kind of my wrap up, really, which is what are the final kind of 3 pieces of advice that you would give someone embarking on their career in procurement and supply chain, or frankly, just
so anything, yeah. You know, I think if anything, if you have a natural curiosity, never lose that natural curiosity. You know, because I think it's that curiosity that drives people like you and me to always want to be learning about new and different things, and just be curious. You know, just ask why and how and all those things. And good, you know, Alan, I wish when I was I've been a homeowner now and been married for almost 40 years. I wish I had YouTube when I bought that fixer upper 40 years ago. Because now you can just figure out any project at home. But that's the type of curiosity, you know, that that I think people need to have, and I think that's wonderful. I think, and it's really hard, but I think there's courage. I think people need courage, and recognize that your greatest learning is through failure. I mean, your greatest learning is to try and do new things. With the expectation that you're gonna learn along the way, and it's not really a failure if you learn something. So courage is so important. Yeah, I think that's so important. And then at the end of the day, you know, you have to live by your own standards, you know, and integrity and trust is really everything. I think people will hire you, or people will work with you and collaborate with you, if they have a sense that you're being your honest self. I'm not asking anyone to be liked. I'm not asking anybody to like me. I'm just going to make you know who I am and what I feel and what I believe. Not that I want to hurt anyone. I just want to be honest with them. And I think that's really, really important. So the integrity, courage, and curiosity are really 3 things that
I love that. And it's a lovely way to kind of wrap things up. Len, huge thank you. I know we were talking earlier, and you know, you're getting ready to go across to Princeton to listen to lectures, and I said, well, and you said it's amazing to learn from these people who've had amazing careers, and I said, well, I'm going to get to do that over the next hour, and I certainly have. So thank you. It's been an honor to hear how things have influenced you throughout your career, and hugely appreciated. Thanks, Len.
Thank you so much, Alan. I appreciate this time.